could be seen.
There's entire studies dedicating to figuring out what people find scary and why. Fear is the kind of response that elicits a primal reaction, and the pursuit of understanding it has gone on for many years. That's why I find it kind of interesting that some people don't need to try to be scary, either because of their presence or their actions or their video games sometimes not working. Like, there's a lot of horror games out there that have problems with their atmosphere or their pacing or just straight up aren't creepy. Getting there by accident is equally impressive and disturbing. I like to think that a lot of thought has been put into how a horror game tries to scare the player, but when a glitch can do that without any direct input from a developer, I find it ever so slightly creepier. It's almost on the same level as creepypastas, where some disturbing thing ends up in the game which was never meant to be there. You're witnessing something terrifying that not a lot of people will ever see. You should consider yourself lucky. If you want horror tropes to jump up in front of you and remind you of the kind of game you're playing, you play a horror game. If you want the line blurred as much as possible and to constantly question the tone of a video game, you should probably play Majora's Mask. There was a time when I used to talk about this game every other video, but these days I can pick and choose the right moments to discuss how Majora's Mask creates tension. And I guess some glitches, whereupon your mind might drift to the bend-round creepypasta and Link's body looking a little more angled than usual. Sadly, it's more of a manual manipulation of the game's code than a glitch, which is a shame because I think it looks hilarious. But Majora's Mask is home to another glitch that feels like it was ripped straight out of a creepypasta. What if Majora's Mask had a different ending? Despite there being a 3-day time limit to your adventures, it is possible to reach the 4th day by zooming out of a telescope at the right time. Something I'm sure most people watching already know because this glitch is kind of famous. The world you end up with after you trigger the 4th day glitch is significantly less busy than it was before, which comes as a bit of a shock considering how bustling Clocktown was in the first 3 days. For whatever reason, most of the NPCs have disappeared, the Carnival Tower in South Clocktown is missing, and the moon is miles away now. Where did everyone go? Did they all get raptured or something? Why is it that talking to the mayor causes a cutscene to play with invisible people? Why is it so easy to crash the game in the 4th day? Regardless, make sure you don't talk to a gossip stone in this state. They have no idea what's going on. Kind of freaking out over here, you could be a little more helpful. The sheer size of Grand Theft Auto games has led to some wild speculation about the nature of the hidden content and how most of it doesn't make a lot of sense. That's part of the fun of the absurdity of these games that runs all the way through to the bottom, but sometimes it does get a little bit weirder. When you have so much going on with so many scripts interacting with each other to create the kind of hectic environment that Grand Theft Auto needs to thrive, there's a guarantee that some of it won't always work as intended. That's why we have ghost cars driving in the middle of nowhere, or invisible character models, or this woman who doesn't know how car seats work. My favourites are pathing errors where NPCs end up walking where they shouldn't be going, like off building roofs, or in such a way as to drown themselves in a lake. I think it's a glitch, but you can never be too sure. Various Grand Theft Auto communities consider the suicidal photographers from San Andreas more of a myth than an actual glitch, as some way of justifying the behaviour of some very confused NPCs. If you're lucky, there's a chance of an NPC spawning near the Los Santos Inlet, at which point they'll spend a brief moment taking pictures of, I'm sure, something very interesting, before walking into the lake and dying instantly, just like other NPCs would. It's a pretty macabre sight, and I can only imagine the reaction of the first person to find this, but it's got an easy explanation. It's likely that Rockstar forgot to program a path for the NPC to follow, so it defaults to walking forward instead. Unfortunately, there's a lake in the way. Still, it produced some fun fan theories. Maybe it's a fish in disguise. I'm gonna go with that for now. 3D models, or more specifically, early renders of 3D models at a time when the technology wasn't quite as refined as it is now, can turn it into nightmare fuel in the blink of an eye. I remember the cartridge tilting from GoldenEye 007 on the N64 and how it turns a semi-serious FPS into the inside of a high-speed blender. I don't claim to understand the calculations that must go into each individual component that makes up a 3D model and how they move and interact in a somewhat realistic way, but just because I don't understand doesn't mean that I can't tell when it's going horribly wrong. It's probably not supposed to look like that. Sometimes the glitches end up being bigger than the video game they come from, which is a shame because the Rocky video game for the PS2 is honestly not that bad. It pays great respect to Rocky's journey through the first 5 movies as you fight through a huge roster of fighters, but then it goes a little bit wrong, and holy goddamn does it go a bit wrong. I'm not exactly sure why this game glitches out as hard as it does, but the 3D models of fighters end up suffering from some serious coding issue, and now they look nothing like human beings. Rocky has transformed into this bug-eyed monster, and Mr. T has a foot coming out of his head. Spider Rico also doesn't have a jaw, which I feel like is cheating in a sport where punching someone in the jaw is a good idea. This wasn't in the movie I watched. Prepare yourself, audience, because it's time for me to tell you where babies come from. When a man and a woman love each other very much, they decide to engage in the sanctimonious act of fucking like rabbits. Then a bunch of biology happens, something involving eggs and sperm and ruining someone's breakfast, and then a baby is made. Then the baby is carried around for 9 months until it's ready to come out, and then, oh god, put it back in. I would give it a few more days if I were you. Babies are magical creatures in The Sims that just kind of happen. I mean, you still need willing participants, but then they hop under the duvet, make some magic, and suddenly you've got another mouth to feed. It truly is the miracle of childbirth. But if you're a keen downloader of custom content, you may come across a mod or two that affects your game of The Sims 3 in small, subtle ways. And slightly larger, less subtle ways as well. And I get it that there's a lot for this game to process, but the fact that something so small can turn a baby into a spaghetti monster is actually hard to believe. I'm not sure who or what we upset, but they are seriously angry right now. You would have thought that babies with strange deformities would be a glitch exclusive to The Sims 3, but something very similar ended up in The Sims 4. And I think at that point you've got to start thinking on the wider spectrum and thinking that some higher power is involved and they are not pleased in any way, but potentially it could just be a bit of lazy programming and lifting a code from the 3rd game into the 4th game without really knowing that there's a glitch in there, but I like my theory better. If Grand Theft Auto is a hotbed for glitches, then a game with slightly less refined mechanics like Red Dead Redemption is nothing short of a glitchy goldmine. Luckily, they very rarely interfere with regular gameplay since everything works the vast majority of the time, but the one thing that Red Dead Redemption has that GTA has never truly explored in any depth is an abundance of wildlife. Horses, wolves, boars, jaguars, and also Bigfoot apparently. They're all here to convince the player that life outside of the towns can be tough going, especially when some of the animals are in fact people with a few issues. You can tell when a glitch is a common occurrence when the community gives it a catchy name. The Manimals from Red Dead Redemption came about from the models for human characters being laid over the top of various animals in the game, resulting in some of the wackiest body horror I've seen in a video game. You haven't known confusion until you've seen a man contort his neck like a snake, or, you know, these guys are flapping their arms like birds. A few of these are hilarious like the donkey lady, but I put it to you that being chased down by a pig man is actually something out of a horror game. It reminds me way too much of Pigsy from Manhunt, and these guys don't even need a chainsaw to be threatening. Thankfully, it's been quite a number of years since it was patched out of Red Dead Redemption, but those were a wild couple of months. I knew life in the Wild West was ruthless, but not like this. When your game focuses on subject matter as morbid as the apocalypse and how society is desperately trying to hold everything together despite the circumstances, you can assume that Fallout gets things done in a certain way. It can be unrelentingly cynical at times, but often with more than a hint of humor mixed in there, so that the suffering of so many innocent people is actually kind of funny. I can get along with that, especially if a kill on someone will occasionally cause them to explode into various body parts. There's definitely no way this can be abused by an error or a glitch. Do your worst, video game! You can set your watch by the frequency of glitches in Bethesda games. Obviously, there's quite a lot going on in these games, so there's every chance that something can go wrong if you manipulate the code in the right way to suit your whatever you're trying to do, but if I kill someone, I kind of expect them to stay dead, especially if I kill them in a ridiculously spectacular way. Ah, but you assume that the world of Fallout New Vegas follows the regular conventions of reality, and I can assure you, it definitely does not. Maybe that explains how you can jib the hell out of a raider, or whatever, save and restart your game, and come back to something a little strange. From Fallout 3 onwards, every human-like character in the game was programmed with a full array of organs and anatomically correct body parts, within reason. For some reason, often triggered by a jib, but not always, some NPCs will have invisible skin and no walk cycle, existing as an emotionless display of innards instead. Sometimes you can find body parts floating in midair, and I'm down for a bit of morbid humor, but this might be too far. These living corpses always seem so surprised. I guess that's what happens when you haven't got any eyelids. Glitches in a horror game are a joke, right? I mean, you're already using every aspect of a game to unnerve the player through sights and ambient sounds and a general oppressive atmosphere. The last thing you need is for an error to do your job for you. Sometimes it can be a little hard to tell if a horror game is having trouble keeping everything together, since I've played a load of games that intentionally do this to keep the player on their toes. But even with Fear's advanced AI being used to give enemies independent thinking, you can tell when it isn't working properly. The Fear games are all about some terrifying apparition called Alma, who is a very powerful psychic who takes the form of an 8-year-old girl or something. I don't know, it's very complicated. The point is that Alma works in the same way as that creepy girl from The Ring, where something all-powerful and creepy as hell takes on the form of something more unassuming. It works very well, but there's a glitch in the second Fear game where I think there's an error with Alma's pathing, and rather than lurk in the background and cause mischief from afar, Alma will just stand around and slowly follow the player around the room. I feel like this could double as a funny glitch, except for the fact that Alma has likely caused you a lot of trouble up to this point where this happens, and now she just won't go away. Except when you melee her, then she'll float away. My people need me. In recent times, we've seen a lot of video games ported to PC to console and vice versa that have been mediocre at best and pretty fucking terrible at worst. Quite often they end up being so bad because of a lack of effort being put into making the switch from one bit of hardware to the next, or if a certain style of game just doesn't work with a controller or a mouse. But none of this explains why weird things happened in the MacBook version of Mafia 2. Most of the time, there isn't anything wrong with this version of the game, but all you need is one cutscene to not quite work as intended, and you'll never sleep again. So there's a point where main character man Vito Scaletta is talking to his mother, and it's a fairly standard moment in the Jesus, okay, maybe not. I'm aware that some people end up with a few texture problems if their graphics card is playing up or isn't compatible with the game or whatever, but does that really explain why Vito's mother randomly doesn't have a face? No, not really. It also doesn't explain why Vito has faces in his hair, but seeing the game shit the bed like this in a cutscene is making me wonder if texture glitches are the way forward. I like how Vito's mother briefly flickers into existence sometimes. She's in there somewhere. I'm always interested in seeing familiar properties put into certain video game styles. You'll probably see it a lot with spin-offs that radically change how a character operates, like putting Mario in a go-kart or Nathan Drake in a fighting game. But it also works with movie tie-ins, or book tie-ins, I guess. I didn't know until recently that there's been a successful series of Sherlock Holmes video games for the last 15 years that has sold a collective 7 million units in that time. They are genuinely pretty decent first-person adventure puzzle games if you like reading lots of things. But Sherlock Holmes The Nemesis makes the fatal mistake of misunderstanding object permanence. And then it gets scary. I suppose you could consider it faithful to the source material that Watson is basically Holmes' shadow in this game, and that Watson has to be nearby at all times. But how would you do this? Any other game would have Watson run after you, rather than what actually happens, which is your alien assistant teleporting behind you whenever you look away from him. I mentioned object permanence because Watson should be over there, but now he's right behind you! And it's kinda hard to do anything in this game when the vast majority of the tension is being provided by your otherworldly companion. Calling it a glitch is a little questionable because Watson's ethereal-like movement is how he moves by standard and without any manipulation, but there's no way in hell that this is what was intended by the developers. I've never seen a first-person horror game as well lit as this. I'm sure if you look closely enough, you can use this video to find out what kind of stuff creeps me out the most. I'll save you the trouble by admitting that when a video game has an enemy chase after the protagonist or follow closely behind them, I just can't deal with that. When this kind of thing turns up in a game where there was no prior warning, such as in the form of a glitch or something, that to me is terrifying because you had no chance to prepare yourself. I have seen some weird things in Skyrim, and it's a good shout to say that most people watching this video have encountered something a little strange in this game. Because even Bethesda's most polished game is prone to moments of insanity. You remember Hearthfire, right? It was some DLC that let you put a ton of time and effort into building and maintaining your own house and adopting a child, I guess. It's not quite as action-packed as some of the other DLC, but I like it if just for giving you mannequins to store armor sets on. If it's good enough for Animal Crossing, it'll probably work for Skyrim as well. But there came a point where I noticed that one of my mannequins wasn't quite where it was supposed to be, but, you know, this is a Bethesda game. Objects are never as nailed to the ground as you'd think. I don't expect a lot from my wooden mannequins, just for them to not be sentient. I passionately draw the line at mannequins that move when you aren't watching. I had enough of this shit in Condemned, and fuck if I'm gonna put up with it now. For whatever reason, I imagine some issue with collision detection or something dumb, the mannequins in the Honeyside house will randomly move around and sometimes float in midair, and why do I have to go down into a basement to find them? My experience with the moving mannequins ends at them being off of the pedestals or levitating, but I've heard stories and seen videos of the mannequins coming alive and chasing you down. I'm not sure if that's a mod or an extra branch to this glitch, but I'm personally glad this never happened to me. I can't say I approve. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you had told me that the moving mannequins were a deliberate feature of Skyrim, implemented by developers who knew exactly what they were doing, I would somewhat believe you. The fact that Honeyside works quite well as a haunted house, and the fact that the mannequins look a little too much like the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who, it is all just a little too perfect for me to think that it's an accident. But then again, that's assuming that Bethesda can work a glitch into their own game, and that would require an extensive knowledge of their own engine, and know how the glitches come about, and how you'd solve them, and